So, relatively quiet week on the racetrack, but we mentioned it, we previewed it before at the end of last week's show. The Claiming Crown was Saturday at Churchill Downs. Really excited day of racing, and the main event of the day, the $225,000 jewel, ended in a disqualification that awarded Laughing Boy the victory. Now, I didn't watch this race live. Usually, I can tell how bad of how controversial of a call it is by going on horse racing Twitter. And if there's only 50 people saying it's the worst DQ they've ever seen, then you know it wasn't that bad. But if it's like 1,000 people and you're like, oh man, I got to check this out. But I only saw like a few dozen, because every DQ is the worst DQ anyone's ever seen on horse racing Twitter. I love this event. It was so cool to see those horses galloping past the Twin Spires. Churchill sounds like they're lobbying to have it there full time. I hope it still bounces around a lot. It was at Churchill in 2022. It was at Fairgrounds last year. I got to give a shout out, and this is something I rarely ever do, to the HBPA, because they were one of the driving forces behind this event. And I just thought it was great. There was a great story in the Blood Horse about it, about how like the owners of these claiming horses got to go to the champagne room at Churchill Downs and like have these major celebrations that are usually just reserved for like the upper crust of the blue blooded of the racing industry when they win grade ones at Churchill Downs. So I love that. I just think it's such a cool event, and so needed to recognize that, you know, not every horse has value. You don't have to be a grade one winner or a stallion. Every horse has value just in general, but also value to the sport. And I love to see that. There's some big 2-year-old racing over the weekend, some big performances as we try to start to spin it forward to Derby 151 that I want to mention. But John, I'll toss it to you on the Claiming Crown.
Joe, I think the Claiming Crown checked every box that it intended to do. They had large fields for the most part. I think the average number of starters in each race was like 10 or 11 horses. There were a couple with 12, one or two with 9, but for the most part, it was right in that sweet spot, which from a gambling standpoint is exactly what all the racetracks have been saying. The more entries that are in there, the more likely it is that people are going to bet and wager and have different combinations, and therefore that should benefit, the overall pool and the overall amount of purses down the road. So I thought that was huge. Number two is 6 of the winners came from other racetracks. Delaware, Indianapolis, Gulfstream Park, Santa Anita, Keeneland, and Colonial were all represented by horses that won their respective races. So again, bring me your tired, you're hungry, your claimers that want to run in starter allowances for a shit ton of money. And that's what they did. So I thought that was really great. And the other thing, Joe, is that, and again, you as a handicapper more so than me, listen to the odds of the winners of each race: 14-1, 4-1, 2-1, 5-2, 30-1, 13-1, 11-1, and 12-1. Sounds to me like there were a lot of horses that were coming in and winning these races that at least from a betting standpoint, they weren't the favorites for the most part. So again, it really added to the intrigue, and I think it spoke to the competition level at these races. And they were very difficult to handicap, which again is great for racing. It's what you want to see. Nobody wants to see chalk every race. I mean, if you get chalk you get a favorite that wins every third race. That's the statistics. That's what you want. But Joe, I think that it did all those things. And then, as you mentioned, I listened to a couple of interviews from trainers that were running at Churchill Downs for the first time, owners that had never walked through the gates and never even, seen that racetrack live, the Twin Spires live there before. It was, the pinnacle of their careers at that moment. And I think that's really important for us to remember, is that, these horses are coming in, they're claiming horses. That's the meat and potatoes of racing. It's what we need to make most races go. We only talk on this show primarily about the black type races and the ones that are movers and shakers in the industry. But for this time of year, this is the absolute perfect set of circumstances and types of races to have to reward people that make these races go on a Wednesday and Thursday and even late races on a Sunday. You have to reward them somehow. And I think this gives everyone an opportunity to have a chance to be in the winner's circle at Churchill Downs.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it was just, it's so cool. Like when you read the story, and shout out to Sean Collins, who did the Blood Horse story. He said multiple trainers describe their wins as the biggest yet in their career.
Yeah.
That's worth something. And one of them was Juan Cano, who he claimed West Point stalwart Voodoo Zip.
Right.
Voodoo Zip, who had raced in the West Point colors until he was 6 years old, was claimed for 50,000 last year.
Right.
Won at 33-1
Right.
in the Canterbury Tom Metzen Memorial. Like that was just so cool to witness. And he said, I waited 2 months for this race. When I looked at the nominations, I thought I had a good chance. It made me so happy. This is the biggest win of my career. Hopefully there's more coming. And this is, I love that. And there was, one thing I love about West Point Partners is they are very, especially on a horse like Voodoo Zip that ran for so long, they're very interested in what happens after the horse gets claimed from us. And he had some like so-so results. So it was just so cool to be able to text those guys and girls and be like, yo, look at your boy Zip. Went in at 33-1 in the claiming crowd, and they were all really thrilled about it. So that was a great result. A few other notable results from the weekend I want to mention. Big time 2-year-old performances as we slowly will start to turn the page and look towards Derby 151. We're less than 6 months away from the first Saturday in May. Guns Loaded is a horse I wanted to mention. He was in a very, very salty looking maiden race on Saturday at Churchill Downs. And I know because we had Castle Run in that race and we think pretty highly of him. And he was really no match. This is a horse who debuted well bet at Saratoga, ran second to another really, really nice horse. And he was absolutely dominant, went right up to the front and kept on cruising. And this is a race where I think the second horse, the horse who ran second, Camp Hale, is also a monster. This is for Ian Wilkes, horse who ran a big, big second at 22-1 first time out. You never see Ian Wilkes horses run like that first time out. Stepped up again, ran another huge second, was like a million lengths clear of third. So I would keep an eye out on the top two from that Saturday race at Churchill, Guns Loaded and Camp Hale. And then this is a horse that I have a tiny bit of a rooting interest in, the Bob Hope Stakes on Sunday at Del Mar. Bullard. West Point owns a small percentage of Bullard. He's by Gunrunner, another Gunrunner monster. Got to rally into a really fast pace, but crushed him. Run by like 4 3/4 lengths. And if you watch the race, like he was running and then he had to stop a little bit and he didn't get like checked or anything, but he made several runs in that race, kicked away. Looks like he's only going to go further and further. And Beto Rispoli was like patting him on the neck before he even crossed the wire. That's another horse that I think you have to be on the lookout for, and I think is only going to get better as he stretches out. Safi Joseph had a pair of rising stars over the weekend. Rojo Rita won by 16 1/4 lengths. She's a filly, potentially maybe a Kentucky Oaks horse. Another horse, Grayscale, who cruised. He was spit to 3-10 first time out. I believe it when I see it. When I see a Safi Joseph horse who's working 44-4 for a half mile, makes it to the first Saturday in May, let alone wins on the first Saturday in May. But John, I thought it was, in a weekend where we had the blue collar success stories, I got a little bit of a glimpse of the future as well.
No question. And if you look historically, Joe, at the winners of the Kentucky Derby, they usually race and or break their maiden in October, November. You don't see a lot of horses that are winning in June and then running 11 months later in the Run for the Roses. They just don't hold up. It's too hard to be a really good horse sprinting and then elongate that to 1.25 miles, in the first weekend of May. So
Don't tell Sandman that.
It happens. It does happen. It just doesn't happen that often.
Right.
But you're right. And certainly, when you're looking for horses to bet for, really any of the Triple Crown races, it's horses that are competing now, that are running in October, November, take a little bit of a break, usually because of the holidays or because there just aren't races setting up for them, as far as points races coming up. And then, they really start hitting the throttle again in January, February, and we go into these $1 million, grade ones that I know Tink is always very upset about, that there's 2-year-old grade ones before the Kentucky Derby. That's a whole nother show that we can talk about. But this is when you see it. So, mark your words, Joe Bianca, that you may be onto something as far as finding some of these horses that are winning, and winning impressively around Thanksgiving, because they do have a tendency to show up big when it comes to the Kentucky Derby preps.
Yeah, this is the runway right here. This is like the start of the runway to the Derby, and it's always an exciting time. So, yeah, it's a couple horses from this past weekend I'd be on the lookout for maybe potential Derby future wagers if you can get a price.